Brother Matthias caught the bell rope in his hand and froze. Novice Ansel was already kneeling beneath it, fingers wrapped around the rough hemp, Abbot Lucas standing 3 paces back and not moving. Doubt sat in Matthias like a tightening band. He expected the bell, the summons, the habit of hours. He did not expect the abbot to let the rope hang unused. Ansel, Matthias, voice low, why are you here? Ansel's shoulders rose and fell. I woke, Brother Matthias. I thought I heard the bell, he said. The bell did not ring. Matthias had the suspicion in his mouth before he had words for it. In the next breath he saw the unmoved face of Abbot Lucas and recognized the problem plainly. The community's measures of time were being undone. That realization held the stakes in hard light. If the monastery abandoned its bell and its watches, bodies and duties would blur. This was not a rumor. It was happening now, in the cloister under lamplight. Matthias's hands kept the ropes steady. He scanned the dark walkway. A thin mist hugged the stone floor. He could hear Sister Beta's distant footfall in the infirmary and the low rasp of pages in the scriptorium, but no bell. He looked at Ansel's knuckles. They were white with grip. The younger man's breath came quick. The doubt shifted in Matthias to an urgent need to know whether this was accident, disobedience, or instruction. Abbot Matthias, turning toward the heavier figure. Did you order this? His voice had the habitual calm he used in the chapter house, but his jaw tightened. Abbot Lucas did not look away from Ansel. We will try an unmeasured rule. Lucas slowly, not as experiment but as obedience. We remove our clockwork. We will learn what remains. Brother Radu, standing in the shadow of the arch, nodded once and added nothing. Matthias felt a first shift. Doubt gave way to alarm. He thought of the infirmary ledger, of the novices who had trouble sleeping in storms, of the ways the bell had steadied bodies wrenched by cold and hunger. He remembered nights when the bell's single pull had brought everyone to the cloister, feet slipping on wet stones, hands fumbling for rope. He remembered how a single sound could gather 100 scattered bodies into one action. The abbot's plan threatened that habit. Matthias straightened his back and stepped closer to Ansel. Ansel, he asked, voice quieter, did Abbot Lucas tell you to do this? Ansel looked up. He asked to sleep when we could, wake when we could, and attend when called without counting hours. We would be watched differently. The word watch, used in that way, made Matthias's throat close. Watched differently, he repeated. They walked to the abbot's cell by candlelight. The cell smelled of beeswax and boiled herbs. Abbot Lucas sat with a thin book open on his knee. Brother Radu moved a stool into the door and set his hands on its edge like a guard. Sit, Lucas, to Matthias without a name. We are to abandon bells and watches for a while, Matthias, for a while. His voice showed the second emotional shift, alarm rippling into a measured resistance. Lucas folded the book shut with slow fingers. This house has kept time to the bell because it organized work and prayer. Now I ask you to accept an unmeasured rule. The body must learn not to trust the bell above the spirit. Matthias's mouth tightened. He looked to Radu. Brother Radu's face was unreadable. He had the careful steadiness of a man who measured his breaths. You will accept this because I command it. Lucas, questioning, disobeys the rule. The abbot's line left no formal room for debate. Matthias sat where the candlelight reached him and listened to the abbot name reasons. Penitence, purgation, a test against worldly reliance. He listened to the quiet logistics, tilted candles for uneven hours, watches shuffled without pattern, the removal of the large tower bell from regular use. Each detail landed as something practical, not poetic. Lucas spoke of a long marginal note in an older register that suggested altered watches as spiritual discipline. When Matthias, where the note came from, the abbot said, from one of our own. A brother who thought to try it and kept his record hidden. In the refectory that evening, they demonstrated the first change. Long tables remained. Soup bowls clinked. The novices stood with candles held at odd angles. The candles had shallow wells of wax on one side and deep pools on the other. Placed on small brass plates, they cast uneven pools of light on numbered wooden pegs along the refectory's long bench. The pegs were not in order. Brother Radu moved a candle and said, when the light crosses your peg, rise. Then leave water and return when the next light tells you. Matthias watched novices lift their heads, pull thin cloaks tighter, and tilt their candles to make the light reach a peg earlier or later. Ansel's hands trembled as he adjusted his candle. I don't know my body with this. Ansel to Radu, my chest stops in strange ways. I forget what hunger feels like. I misplace my watchword, Radu answered. You will learn. The body adapts, the exchange was short. Radu's words made no promise and carried no sympathy. The emotional shift here moved from alarm into a raw misgiving that tightened in Matthias's limbs. Matthias spent the next night in the scriptorium copying a thick volume of rules. His fingers traced inked lines. While he copied, his eye caught a cramped, slanting note tucked into a margin so narrow the quill had grabbed at the vellum. He drew his knife and eased it free. The marginalia was in a different hand, smaller, impatient, and described a practice of deliberate disorientation. Uneven watches, tilted lights, and deliberate removal of mechanical time as a means to loosen selfhood. The discipline produced clarity for some and collapse for others. It named a brother Gero who had tried it and kept tallies of minutes he did not remember. Matthias read the note twice. The doubt returned, this time as a whisper of betrayal. Why hide such a thing in the rulebook? Why not speak openly? He closed the book and pressed his fingertips to the parchment until the warmth of his skin dulled the cold. He took the marginal note to Radu at dawn. Radu, Matthias, voice low in the corridor. There is a note. It names brother Gero and says this was tried before. Radu's mouth flattened. We have records enough of brother Gero, he said. You will keep this quiet. The abbot chooses us to hold it now. Matthias's jaw moved. If it harms the novices. He asked, you will bring those facts to me and I will judge. Radu crisply. The exchange contained two more short, sharp emotion shifts. From suspicion to a cold, methodical resolve in Radu. From doubt to cautious concealment in Matthias. That night the uneven watches commenced in earnest. Novices shuffled to stations at odd intervals. Some slept in the nave, others paced the cloister. The bell tower sat dark and unused. Ansel kept losing track. He wandered into the outer cloister and then collapsed onto the stone, hands on his head, eyes squeezed shut. Brother Matthias ran to him and knelt. Stay with me, Matthias ordered, taking one shoulder in both hands. Ansel's fingers left wet marks on the habit. I cannot tell morning from midnight. My hands go light, the book's lines blur. I am afraid I will forget prayer. Matthias felt the second required emotion shift. Alarm curdling into protective action. Abbot Lucas arrived, the hem of his robe dragging on the flagstones. Bring him up, Lucas, we will not punish confusion. We will guide it. Radu moved to help. The three of them lifted Ansel to a bench and gave him warm broth. He drank slowly. Matthias watched the way Ansel's lips worked, the quick swallow. He saw fear in the small flinch when light touched Ansel's eyes. Matthias questioned the abbot across the table. Abbot Lucas, this is breaking some men. Ansel's hands tremble. He cannot place day and hour. He forgets the psalm he must chant. Who keeps our novices steadied if we remove the bell? Matthias. Lucas set his cup down without looking at Matthias. We steady the spirit first. The body comes later. We will not return to the bell unless the experiment fails in ruin. His tone carried the third emotional turn. From methodical certainty in Lucas to a sharp fracture with Matthias's concern. Matthias felt betrayed by the abbot's refusal to weigh bodily harm as equal to spiritual gain. They argued in short lines. Abbot, the infirmary list will grow. Matthias, brother Radu, you see this, do you not? Radu answered, I see it. We will watch carefully. Matthias pushed. Watching carefully is not ringing when the watch collapses. We must use the bell when it is needed, the abbot replied. You will not dictate obedience in this house. Obedience is to the rule I set. The back and forth contained 5 rapid lines of tension. Each line changed the room's weight. Ansel listened with his head bowed. That exchange led to confrontation at the bell rope. The bell tower landing smelled of cold iron and dust. Matthias climbed the narrow steps with his palms pressed to the worn stone. Radu followed. Lucas came last, candle held low. The rope hung like a question. Matthias grasped it and pulled. It did not move freely. A knot bound it to the yoke. He looked up and saw a crude fastening, a deliberate precaution. Who tied the knot? Matthias demanded. Radu, it was lashed this morning. The abbot ordered all service ropes secured from regular use. Matthias felt his hands go tight. You cannot fasten the bell against the need of men, he said. Lucas moved between them. Brother Matthias, you must accept my command. To pull now would be to force order upon our own experiment. You will not do that under my roof. Matthias swallowed. His mouth tasted of iron. He tried to pull again and the knot held. He stared at the abbot and for a moment considered open defiance. The fourth emotion shift arrived, resolve hardening into the impulse to protect memory rather than obey outwardly. Then I will preserve what I can. Matthias to Radu once Lucas stepped away. He did not ask permission. He found a small strip of cloth in his satchel and eased the knot loose enough to let the rope ring once, gently, a single low note into the empty morning. No one came running. The note sank into the stone. Hurrying footsteps approached, then stopped at the tower top. Abbot Lucas's face was stern when he entered the landing. "You have broken my order," he said. Matthias met Lucas's eyes. "I rang to mark the hour once more. The men need memory as much as discipline." Radu stood with his hands at his sides. "Matthias," Radu quietly, "Lucas will punish this if he chooses for a beat." Matthias expected the abbot to strike. Instead, Lucas's jaw moved. "If you preserve that which we remove, keep it secret. Do not make this a rebellion. Keep a record. Hide it." A wet confusion passed across Matthias. Anger, then a softer calculation. He had wanted openness. He had instead been offered complicity. That night under a low dawn, Matthias and Radu went to the walled herb garden. The herbs still smelled of rain. The garden wall was low enough to reach. Matthias carried the marginal note and a small cracked sundial he had kept from the infirmary roof. They found a hollow between stones and pushed the note and the sundial into it, covering the seam with moss and a sprig of thyme. Matthias's hands shook while he worked. Radu watched the work with the still restraint he applied to all things. "We will not wake men with it unless they are in danger." Radu. Matthias placed the sundial in the hollow and pressed the stone back. He felt his doubt move to a private, stubborn commitment. He had not struck openly against the abbot. He had not pulled the rope wide to call the community. He had instead preserved a record. This quiet, practical rebellion was his choice. Keep the memory of measured hours safe in case the unmeasured rule tore more than it healed. Dawn came and the cloister filled with fog. The monastery resumed its new ordinary, uneven candles, shuffled watches, and no regular bell. Matthias walked to the abbey gate and found the cracked sundial half, buried as if it had always been there, shadowed by moss. He touched the worn face and felt the roughness of the carved lines. It was small and useless in the fog, but it was a device people had read and trusted. He turned the sundial so its shadow meant something private and folded his hands. He had hours of recording ahead. Notes on who slept when, who woke unbidden, who declined under the new rule. He would record illnesses and confusion, the names written beside times no one else would count. He would in secret measure what the abbot had unmeasured. The choice was concrete. He would not stop the abbot by force. He would not make the experiment public. He would keep a ledger and the sundial tucked in the garden wall for a time when someone might need proof the bell had once rung and the house had once kept measured hours. Matthias walked away from the gate as the fog thinned. He kept his hands folded over his satchel, where the leather pressed the marginal note against his palm. Radu fell into step beside him. "You did not break it entirely, brother Matthias." "Radu." Matthias let out a short breath. "No," he said, "but I will not let them forget how to count the day." He did not promise rebellion or confrontation. He promised record and quiet stewardship. They rejoined the cloister where Ansel knelt to tie his sandal. Ansel looked up and met Matthias's eyes. He gave the smallest nod. "Brother Matthias," he whispered, "I fear the dark hours less when I hear you reading the psalm from your cell at dawn." Matthias's lips pressed together. He had read the psalm. He had not rung the bell. The abbot's rule held, so did a man's small duty. By the time the sun stood higher, the new routine felt ordinary in action though not in spirit. The novices were more careful with their candles. The refectory moved in jagged rhythms. Some men adapted. Others did not. Matthias kept his ledger under wraps, and every entry he wrote began with an action. A collapse, a miscounted hour, a prayer lost, a psalm remembered. He wrote names as evidence. The record felt heavy in his satchel, and it steadied him in a way the bell no longer could. The chapter closed not with declaration but with a practical act. Matthias slipped the sundial further under the moss, pressed the stone back into place, and straightened. He watched the cloister doors open and men move through uneven sets of tasks. He had preserved the instrument and the marginal note. He had tested the bell once and been stopped. He had faced the abbot and not been dismissed to leave. He had chosen secrecy as protection. When he turned to walk back toward the scriptorium, he heard from the far side of the cloister a soft, single voice chanting the old psalm in a measured tempo. For a moment the sound and his preserved sundial folded into one concrete fact. Some things could be hidden, and some made audible in small ways. He did not stay to argue. He carried his record forward and kept his hands on the rope of duty that was not the tower bell but the duty to remember. The morning closed on the monastery's new rules, and Matthias carried the marginalia and the cracked sundial toward the scriptorium with Raju at his side, keeping watch. Brother Matthias stepped into the dormitory and found novice Ansel sitting bolt upright on his rushes, hands clenched at his knees, and saying he did not know what hour it was. Suspicion tightened in Matthias's chest as he crossed the stone floor. The suspicion shaped every step he took and grounded his questions. He set the lamp on the footstone, the brass catching the wick, and Abbot Lucas stood in the doorway with his hood down, watching without a single word. The moment announced the central conflict. The house had removed its usual markers, and someone, the abbot, he supposed, had ordered the brothers to let time drift. Matthias moved nearer. He touched the back of Ansel's neck with a finger and felt dry skin and a faint tremor. "Ansel, Matthias, what is wrong?" Ansel's eyes were wet. "I woke and could not tell the hour," Ansel answered. "I thought the bell would pull me out of sleep." It did not pull. Matthias glanced at Lucas. Lucas did not step forward. He did not shake his head. He only held the doorway open and looked at the men below the rafters. That look felt like an instruction. Matthias had felt that rope in his hand the week before and frozen. Its weight had been a fact he could name. Now the fact had been denied to them. The memory from the bell rope returned as a sharp detail, not as a recollection of mood. Rough hemp, an old knot, novice Ansel kneeling before it, and Abbot Lucas 3 steps back. Matthias held that image to ground his suspicion and to measure what had changed. He lifted the lamp and moved through the dormitory, calling names softly. Brother Gregor was awake, curled at the foot of his pallet, and Prior Elias sat on a crate by the window with a piece of cloth folded over his hands. The men answered in low voices. A few feet away, a hurried rustle came from Thomas's bunk as he sat up and blinked against the lamplight. "Matthias, Thomas, they shifted our watches again." "I do not know when I last slept for longer than an hour." The voices were short, clipped. They held fear in actions. Hands rubbing temples, sleeves pulled over knuckles, breath held between words. "Matthias, who ordered this?" Ansel's mouth opened and shut. "The abbot," he said. "Prior Elias, it will clear the mind. We must untie ourselves from the hour. We will be purer." The words landed heavy. Matthias felt another change inside him. Doubt, then irritation. He had come into the monastery to measure the day by work and prayer, by the bell and the slow turning of tasks. The idea that they would rearrange hours as a discipline felt like a deliberate erasure. He followed the sounds down to the refectory. The table was long and half-lit. Prior Elias sat at the head, sleeves rolled, looking younger than his title. Abbot Lucas stood near the hearth and watched the cooking pot tremble on its chain. A younger brother was ladling gruel with a deliberate slowness. When Matthias arrived, he walked straight to the prior and said, "Elias, what have you done with our bell?" His voice kept its calm, but his hands curled around the edge of the bench. Elias did not flinch. He put the wooden ladle down and looked at Matthias with an even gaze. "Brother Matthias, Elias, we silenced the bell. We rotate watches. It is a discipline. The abbot claims it will tear away dependence on hour and clock and leave room for a truer prayer." Matthias named the feeling that pushed in his throat. Anger. He spoke a sentence tight as a rope. "You call that mercy? This breaks bodies. It breaks sleep." Elias placed his palms on the table. "It breaks habit to expose what the soul prefers." Elias answered, "It is a teaching." Matthias felt his doubt deepen into alarm. He turned to the other brothers at table. Their faces showed dry fatigue. Gregor's jaw worked. Thomas's hands lay open on the bench. The cost was visible in their movements. The conversation hardened into argument. Prior Elias, "Matthias, we have the rule. We keep the hours for order. Why undo that order for an experiment?" Elias's answer came quick. "Because Abbot Lucas, so Elias, because the rule will be clearer if we are not bound to a bell. Obedience is the path." Matthias heard the word obedience like a blade. He pushed further. Obedience does not require breaking a brother. A short exchange followed with brisk back, and fourth lines, Matthias, listen, Elias. You assume pain where there may be gain, Elias. I see broken men, Matthias. The men cannot find sleep. They tremble. They will find something else. Elias answered, they will learn. The argument lasted a few lines more. The voices were economical and sharp. Other brothers shifted in their seats and spoke a single sentence now and then. Ansel only stared into his bowl. Afterwards, Matthias left the refectory and went to the scriptorium. Light came through high windows in thin bars. Brother Thomas leaned over a desk and cleaned a quill. Matthias moved among shelves of vellum and found the ledger he had been told to expect. The vellum smelled of worn ink and beeswax. He opened it and read margin notes in a cramped hand that he knew at once. Abbot Lucas's hand. The ledger described a schedule that intentionally scrambled watches, assigned waking without sequence, and rotated duties to prevent bodily settling. The notes called the practice unmooring, and the line beneath it read in shortened, measure less, bind less, test endurance. Matthias read the words aloud to himself and felt the second emotion shift. The suspicion grew into a cold, steady fear. The ledger made the disorder intentional. It was not negligence, it was not chaos. It was authority. He folded the page back and placed the ledger under his habit. He did not hide it so much as tuck it away. When Thomas noticed, he did not ask. Thomas only said, Matthias, be careful. The abbot reads those vellum pages differently from most men. Matthias nodded. That exchange placed an event between them. A choice to keep the ledger's contents private. The abbot called a trial that night. Under lamplight in the cloister garth, the abbot assembled a small group. Prior Elias, Brother Gregor, Novice Ansel, Brother Thomas, and Matthias. The abbot spoke in plain sentences. We unmoor the house for the sake of faith, he said. He described the rotation like a mechanic would describe a device. He gave orders to break sleep at intervals and to change watches without warning. The men listened. Faces tightened. Ansel's hands clenched tighter than before. The trial began with small exercises. A brother would be woken and commanded to stand and recite psalms. Then watches were shifted at unpredictable moments. Matthias was assigned to observe rather than to act. He watched Ansel falter under repeated wakings. He watched Gregor hold his posture while his eyes reddened. He watched Thomas steady himself with a palm to his chest. The observation deepened Matthias's fear into something else. Resolve. He resolved to record what he saw. He held a small knife, edge of determination, and a pen in the other hand. In the middle of the night, while Matthias went for an extra lamp, he found Gregor's cell door half open. He paused. Inside, Gregor sat hunched over a small object on the bench, a sundial dented in half, buried beneath a coil of rope. Gregor looked up and did not hide it. I keep it for myself. Gregor, when the house is lost, I need to know day from day. The sight changed the scene. A surprise occurred. Someone kept a secret anchor. Gregor pushed the sundial across the bench toward Matthias. Take it if you must. Gregor, if you need to hide it well. Matthias felt the third emotion shift. From resolve to quiet compassion. He did not speak quickly. He slipped the sundial into his satchel and closed his hand over it. The discovery created a small fracture in the monastery's apparent anonymity. It also created a new risk. When Prior Elias learned a sundial had been found, he warned them in tones that carried across corridors. Any secret marker is disobedience, Elias. It threatens the experiment. The word set the stage for the chapter's peak. The abbot heard and ordered a search. The air in the cloister felt tight with the possibility of exposure. Matthias kept his satchel next to his pollet and counted breaths. Night fell deeper, and the most dangerous moment arrived in the narrow corridor by the chapter house. Abbot Lucas confronted Matthias with a single command, hand me the sundial, Lucas. The order landed without flourish. Matthias's body reacted first. His hands tightened on the satchel strap. His breath shortened. His immediate reaction was obedience, an old reflex, and then a counter-action, his conscience. He could hand the object over and follow a clear line of obedience, or he could hide the sundial and protect the small resistance gathering. The corridor walls were close. Lantern light pooled on the flagstones. Brother Gregor waited a few paces behind, eyes fixed on the floor. Matthias, the abbot again now. The lines that followed were quick and compact. Gregor spoke first. Do not take it. Gregor, it keeps us human. The abbot's hand moved toward the satchel. You will obey, Lucas. Then Matthias did something that altered everything. He slipped the sundial into his satchel instead of handing it over. He put a palm flat on the satchel and said, Abbot, I will not surrender what keeps a man awake with reason. The corridor held its breath for a taut moment. The confrontation turned into rapid exchange. Matthias, Lucas sharply, you disobey me. Abbot Lucas, Matthias, you also test us with hunger and nights. You ask obedience as proof of faith. I cannot give the thing that keeps men anchored to the day. It is not cruelty to hold a memory of morning. Gregor leaned forward a hair. Thomas stepped into the light. The argument reached the required rapid back and forth. Lucas, Elias, Matthias, Gregor, and Thomas each said short sentences that hit like stones. You betray the rule. Lucas, you break the household. I keep a measure of reason. Gregor, you force men into confusion. Matthias, you endanger order. Elias, we follow to find a truer prayer. Lucas, my conscience commands me otherwise. Matthias answered. The exchange lasted 5 lines exactly and then tapered into a silence with a sound, the distant bell in the village, muffled by walls. That bell sound felt like a concrete reminder of what they were unmaking. Matthias walked away without giving the sundial. He did not shout, he did not storm. He kept his gait steady and measured. He returned the sundial to Gregor in a narrow cloister corner later, sliding it into Gregor's hands with a small nod. Gregor's fingers closed on the metal and the action settled the immediate danger. The choice was small and precise. Keep the object, protect the anchor, preserve an ember of private measure. The aftermath moved quickly into routine. The house carried on under the new regimen. Men carried bowls, men mended habits. Prior Elias continued to announce watch changes. Ansel trembled less each day and learned to recite a psalm with a mouth that did not find its hours. Matthias sat at his desk and wrote careful notes. He described the ledger, the trial, the sundial, and his own choice. He wrote without flourish, in blunt lines. What happened, who said what, who moved where. He kept to facts because facts would not be read as supposition. Thomas came by the scriptorium and glanced at Matthias's notes. He put a hand on Matthias's shoulder and said, We must be ready if they demand more. The abbot does not stop at a test. I know. Matthias, I will keep the ledger safe. Thomas replied, Then do not keep it alone. That line added a new plan. It divided responsibility. It was quiet and concrete. It changed how they would act in the next hours. The chapter closed not in a speech, but in a small, deliberate act. Matthias took a single sheet from the ledger, copied a passage about the rotation, and slid the copy into the lining of his satchel. He tied the satchel's flap and set it beneath his pallet. Then, as dawn smeared pale light on the cloister stones, Novice Ansel came and knelt at Matthias's bench. He whispered a single line. Brother Matthias, if I forget the hour again, will you remind me? Matthias put his hand over Ansel's shoulder and said, Yes. The gesture was simple and changed nothing about the abbot's plan, but it made a private promise concrete. Outside the chapter house, the bell that no longer ruled their lives sounded faintly from the village. The sound did not break the monastery's decision, but it registered as a fact the men could name. Matthias rose and buttoned his habit. He felt suspicion arrive again in a small, watchful way. He felt fear more discreet now, and he carried a steadier resolve. He had chosen to keep an anchor and to share a ledger with Thomas. Those concrete acts closed the chapter's immediate crisis. A small twist remained. During the night trial, the abbot had said the experiment was for clarity of prayer. Later in the ledger, Matthias found a marginal note that named a second motive. Trial by endurance to test the monastery's claim to a new benefactor. The line suggested that an outside patron might expect proofs of obedience. This revelation altered how Matthias understood earlier words and indicated that the house's experiments answered demands beyond the cloister. The change meant stakes would widen, and Matthias wrote the new line into his notes. Matthias's last page for the night was a plain list of names and actions. He recorded Gregor's sundial, Elias's defense of obedience, Ansel's faltering, Thomas's steady hand, and the abbot's ledger. He did not promise change. He promised only to write and to pass the ledger's knowledge to one other brother. The chapter closed on a single, physical beat. Matthias slipping the copied page into the satchel's lining, then laying the satchel beneath his pallet where the rushes creaked when he sat. The creak was an ordinary sound, but it marked a concrete decision and left the monastery moving under its experiment and under a quiet, private resistance. Brother Matthias stepped from the cloister's covered walk and halted where Brother Peter stood among the clipped yews. One hand pressed flat to the mossed stone and the other holding a crescent of cracked brass. Suspicion sat in Matthias like a pebble in his mouth. He felt it before he spoke. "Peter," he said, and the name was a small, sharp thing in the cold pre-dawn air. Peter did not look at him at once. He kept his eyes on the sundial shard and repeated the same sentence over and over. "I do not know what morning it is." The central problem arrived with the shard. The monastery's measures of day and night were failing the men who lived by them, altering their sleep, their prayers, and the thin scaffolding of habit that held their identities. Matthias moved closer and saw the brass plate's edge had been nicked, the noon marker ground away by a small, deliberate file. He touched the shard with the pad of a finger, feeling grit and cold metal. The action told him more than a dozen sermons would have. Someone had changed the hour, marking instrument by hand. He pulled Peter's sleeve with a fingertip. "Show me where you found it, Matthias." Peter's fingers trembled when he handed over the broken brass. The trimmer became a second voice. "Fear." Matthias's suspicion shifted toward a tangible fear that the regimen of shifted measures had become an ordered tampering, not an accident. Matthias had seen odd things before. He remembered the bell rope caught in his hand, and the pause in Chapter 1, the way Novice Ansel knelt beneath while Abbot Lucas stood back. He remembered stepping into the dormitory and finding Ansel bolt upright, not knowing the hour. These recalled facts were not distant, they were tools. He folded them into movement. "Where were you at first light?" he asked. Peter answered with a place and a single action. "By the western wall, Brother Matthias." "I felt the sun wrong and went to the sundial." The exchange was precise, spare. That precision became Matthias' way to measure truth. They walked the pre-dawn cloister in silence. The stones scraped at their sandals. Small physical sounds governed the moment. At the infirmary door, Brother Joran opened a shutter and looked out with the blunt, practical gaze of a man who measured bodies rather than time. "Show me the brass, Joran." He did not ask what it meant. That absence of rhetorical inquiry steadied Matthias. Joran's focus on the object kept the scene from drifting into speculation. In the infirmary, Joran laid the shard on a table and ran his calloused thumb along the nick. He checked Peter's pulse without ceremony. "He is exhausted," Joran reported. He named a body fact: pulse, color of lips, dampness at the temple, then pressed for detail. "When did this start?" "Matthias." "Peter swallowed last week, after Vespers," he said. "I woke at the hour for compline and could not tell if it was dawn. I walked. The sundial felt like an accusation. I found this." A silence dropped between them like a small, clattering stone. Suspicion bent into worry and then into a quiet resolve in Matthias. He would not allow worry to be mere thought. He would act. Abbot Lucas summoned a small assembly in the chapter house that morning. The chapter house smelled of beeswax and cold stone. The abbot spoke with measured lines. "We will tighten watches," he said, "stagger the hours." He framed the decision as sanctification, dislocation as holy discipline. Matthias listened and found his throat dry. He watched Novice Ansel's face when the abbot used the phrase "paring away." Ansel's jaw worked. The meeting contained a soft argument without voice. Those words sounded like a command to break the inner clock of a man. After the meeting, Matthias found Thomas in the refectory. Thomas was a broad-shouldered man with quick hands and a careful mouth. "Thomas, Matthias, come with me." They moved beneath the refectory's long beams and set their shoulders against the low conversation of monks. The refectory's hour markers had been shifted, candle stands set at odd intervals, chalk marks erased and redrawn at slanted angles. In the storage alcove they found stacked sandglasses, some sealed with wax, others refilled with sand of differing coarse grades. Thomas turned one and held it to the light. The sand within ran thin and then hesitated in the middle, then ran again. He set it down hard. "This is not piety, Thomas." His voice had a flatness that carried blame. Matthias nodded. He felt the second emotion shift, doubt curdling into certainty. If the implements of hours were deliberately altered, the abbot's tightening looked less like sanctification and more like engineering the monk's sense of time. Matthias, we must be careful. We must not accuse without proof. Thomas answered with a short, clipped sound. Matthias, proof will be made of men, not glass. We watch. The two men separated with the same plan. Observe, record, protect. That night a failed watch occurred. Novice Ansel had been assigned the north choir, where the stone benches lined up and the choir's small lamp burned with a wavering wick. The appointed hour for his watch arrived, and he broke from the psalm mid-verse. He rose, hands dropping from the book, and walked out of the choir with a slow, flat step. Brother Joran rose after him. Ansel, Joran called, "Where are you going?" Ansel did not answer. Matthias and Joran left their posts and went in search. The corridor smelled of rushes and lamp oil. Footsteps echoed. The sound of men in motion filled the spaces between breaths. They found Ansel at the cloister's outer wall, near the mossed sundial, staring with a face that had emptied of speech. He touched the sundial's worn lip and whispered, "What hour, brother?" Matthias crouched beside him and held Ansel's shoulder. "Ansel, answer me. What did you see?" Ansel's eyes rolled like an absent tide, and he said a phrase that became the cliffhanger of the middle. "It me nothing. It me to forget the bell," the words hung. Matthias felt the room tilt into panic. He felt his jaw set, muscles tightening. This was not mere tiredness. It was a collapse of a man's compass. Abbot Lucas arrived then, quiet-footed, a figure in a plain habit. He looked at Ansel with a face that did not change. Silence, he ordered. Isolation for prayer. He laid a hand on Ansel's shoulder and, in the small way an abbot can, turned the scene into a command. Matthias opened his mouth to argue and closed it. He did not want to be the man who argued against the abbot publicly. He also did not trust orders that forbade asking questions. The abbot's calm voice contained a decision that would be enforced by the house: silence and secrecy. Matthias escorted Ansel to a cell near the infirmary. Ansel's steps had lost rhythm. He kept touching his own wrists as if to find a beat. Joran set a small bowl of broth on the table and checked Ansel's hands for tremor. He mumbles at night. Joran, he described actions. Waking, calling out, tugging the mattress. These were facts that would later stitch into a case. Matthias watched Ansel eat in 2 bites, watched the way his fingers clenched the wooden spoon. He felt a fresh shift, concern turning into anger. Anger rose in short, practical lines. Why force a regimen that unwaves men? That afternoon Matthias and Thomas returned to the refectory under cover of work. The shifted candle stands stood like uneven teeth along the long table. Matthias moved each stand a few inches, with the care of a man rearranging a map. Thomas lifted a sealed sand glass and tapped the wax. "They've altered the run time on several," he muttered. His voice had the right to be fierce. "They've changed the weight of the sand." Matthias ran a hand over the edge of the bench where someone had carved a tiny notch. He found a scrap of linen tucked beneath a board, a page with notes in a hand he recognized as the abbot's secretary. The note named a regimen. Staggered prayers, rotated duties, removed hour markers. It named a purpose, to sever reliance on earthly scaffolds. Matthias showed Thomas the page. "Lucas wrote this." "Thomas," Matthias tapped a line. "It is his hand." He approved it. They spoke in quick phrases. "We must not show it to the house. Who will believe us?" Matthias answered with a sound that was not a full sentence. He saw the third emotional shift, from anger back into a cold, steady determination to witness. He decided to record what he saw rather than to confront without ally or proof. He would keep a secret chronicle. That night, while the rest of the monastery slept in scattered patterns of breath, Matthias slipped into his cell and took out a sheet of parchment. He did not write philosophy. He wrote specimens of events. The sound of the bell rope caught, Peter's shard, Ansel's near, speechless collapse, the abbot's order. He folded each note and tucked it into his small leather satchel. The act of writing was not a reflection but an assembling of evidence. Each sentence was short, precise. Peter found brass. Joran, exhaustion. Abbot, staggered watches. Ansel's silence. A knock came at his door. Matthias froze. He put the pen down with a measured motion. Through the shutter he saw Brother Joran's profile, then Brother Thomas's broad shoulder in the moonlight. Matthias. Joran in a low voice. "We have seen the sand glass sealed in the sacristy. It runs slower by a quarter turn. We think they altered the markers in the dormitory." Thomas's breath made a small white cloud. "We cannot leave Ansel alone," he added. Their voices carried purpose and fear. "We will not move against the abbot," Joran finished, "but we will watch." The three men agreed without formal words. The agreement was threaded through small actions. A hand pressed to a shoulder, a nod, the way Thomas set his jaw. At dawn, Matthias walked to the western wall alone. The weather was thin and clear. Frost rimed the low stones. He found the sundial's base more exposed now. Someone had scraped away moss to make an outline. He crouched and touched the cleaned stone where a dozen fingers had left grit. The smell of cold earth rose. He thought of the bell rope he'd grasped months earlier and the dormitory scene where Ansel had been undone. Those memories shaped his next move. He rose and went to the chapter house, but not to accuse. He went to place a single sack of barley in the infirmary storeroom and to watch how the abbot moved through the house. Seeing the abbot in small, exact acts, lighting a lamp, speaking a quiet prayer, running a finger along a ledger, was part of Matthias' evidence. A twist arrived late that morning. Brother Thomas found a ledger hidden behind a loose stone in the refectory. The ledger recorded watch rotations with a precision that matched the abbot's note, but entries in another hand detailed changes to instruments. A blacksmith paid to alter sandglasses, a candle maker asked to trim stands to uneven heights. The ledger named a man a lay workman, Pieter of the village. Thomas read the name aloud, Pieter. Matthias, he brings tools. He does the abbot's bidding. The revelation changed the target. The regiment was not born solely of holy text, but of paid, practical alteration. Matthias felt the ground under his suspicion harden into resolve. That evening the abbot called for a quiet assembly. He spoke again of paring away anchors. He spoke in words that could comfort some and frighten others. Matthias watched faces, Ansel's pale cheeks, Joran's folded hands, Thomas' clenched jaw. The abbot's presence offered a coercive logic. If the house accepted dislocation as discipline, then obedience was itself sanctifying. Matthias sat and listened, and he calculated small choices. He would not shout in the chapter house. He would not spread alarm. He would keep his written record and let time and fact make the case. Late night tasks pulled Matthias to the infirmary where he found Peter awake and pacing in a slow circle. Peter held his sundial shard to the lamp and turned it as if reading it by the glow. Peter, Matthias, do you remember the bell rope? Peter's eyes snagged on the memory. I remember you with the rope, brother Matthias. You paused. I thought you rang and did not. The exchange tied back to the earlier episodes in which habit had been broken. Peter lifted his chin. I cannot tell when to sleep now, he said. The words were not a metaphor. They were a description of repeated failure. Waking in the night, going to the wall, standing until muscle ached. Matthias sat and wrote the last lines of the night's notes by the infirmary lamp while Peter settled on a pallet. He wrote in short, factual bursts and then folded the page into the satchel beneath the strap. The final event of the chapter arrived in concrete form. A decision sealed in action. He would not confront the abbot yet. He would watch, gather proof, and keep a record that named who had been altered, how, and by whom. He took the satchel and closed his belt. The house moved on, lamps guttering in their predictable wash, but Matthias kept a small, steady light of his own. He left the infirmary turning the lock with quiet fingers, and the chapter ended with him fastening the satchel and stepping back into the cloister, the leather strap cutting once across his habit as he moved toward the dormitory. Brother Matthias pushed the refectory door open and found Abbot Lucas and Novice Ansel bent over a ring of tilted candles. Suspicion tightened in Matthias the way a cord tightens around a wrist. He had expected the bell, the summons, the ordinary shape of hours, and instead he found a pattern laid bare on the stone. He set the leather satchel at his hip and stepped forward so his boots did not knock against the long table. The candle flames leaned unevenly because each wick burned on a small sliver of wax set at a deliberate angle. Matthias's first words were not a question. Abbot Lucas, he said, and his voice folded itself to fit the room's hush. Lucas did not look up at once. Ansel's fingers trembled on a piece of hemp beside him. The hemp smelled of smoke and damp rope. The problem was concrete. The monks would keep a bellless watch tonight. The abbot intended to force an hourless vigil, and the novices would be placed at the experiment center. Matthias remembered the bell rope in his hand from the earlier day. Memory of that caught rope still sat in the throat of his recollection. He thought of Novice Ansel sitting bolt upright in the dormitory, hands clenched at his knees, claiming he did not know the hour. He thought of Brother Peter's cracked brass crescent in the cloister. Those were facts now, not guesses. Suspicion moved him to act. Why this pattern, Abbot? Matthias. He folded his hands and kept his feet still. He kept his voice steady because he had watched how steadiness could shift a man's face. Why tilt the candles? Abbot Lucas leveled his eyes. He wore the flat face monks adopted for the work of administration. His voice was slow, measured. Matthias, Lucas, we unmoor measure to train the soul. The pattern tonight will loosen the habit of self. Ansel looked at Lucas with a mouth that trembled. Abbot, Lucas cut him with a single gesture. Silence. There is duty. Matthias heard duty and remembered the tally of nights he'd started to suspect were dangerous. His second emotional turn was toward fear. Not for his own bones, but for a novice with hands that shook. The fear sharpened into motion. He moved around the table and laid his palm on a tilted wax base. The candle wobbled under his touch. He reached beneath the circle and, without dramatizing the act, moved a candle aside. Linen, wrapped paper, and a short coil of broken watch parts slid free. He pulled the paper open. The folded note listed dates and a single terse word beside several names. The list had a column of times where men had failed to recover fully from night vigils. The paper had water stains and the black ink had feathered in one corner. Matthias read the note aloud so the names could no longer hide. May 14th, Brother Jonas, collapsed between watches, he said. The words landed in the refectory like a weight. Lucas's jaw tightened. Ansel's breath hitched. Brother Peter, who had been tending the doorway, stepped in and set a cracked brass ark on the table. Peter, Matthias, you kept this. Brother Peter's face was pressed with a tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep. He laid the ark out with care. I have counted. Matthias, Peter, I kept it because I could not bear the quiet lies. Matthias felt anger rise, quick and bright after fear. The anger changed his tone. Why did you not speak sooner? He asked. Peter's hand lifted and fell. I thought to stop it quietly. I tried to interrupt the watches before they broke any more. The abbot shuts questions down. Peter's voice broke on the last words. The three men exchanged short lines in rapid sequence. Abbot, Matthias, you have proof of harm here. We do this for surrender. Lucas replied. Surrender has a price. Matthias Ansel is thin. He is not yet a man for such cost. Peter added, you accuse me of causing harm. Lucas answered, I accuse you of hiding facts. Matthias. The dispute took the edge of ritual and showed the bone beneath. The conversation shifted the refectory's balance. A second external event arrived when a faint knock sounded on the inner door. Novice Ansel's hand against timber, or someone checking the infirmary. The knock forced a pause and made each breath visible. The knock was small. It counted as the next concrete movement in the evening's sequence. Lucas rose so slowly his robe made only a whisper. This is discipline, he said to Matthias, and to Peter with the same voice. You will attend the hour. You will learn to let the clock go. Matthias's response was physical. He stepped between Lucas and Ansel. Then I will attend. Matthias, I will not let the novices be the only instruments. I will stand in the watch and keep Ansel from falling apart. Lucas's mouth flattened. Would you obstruct the pattern? He asked. Matthias named the risk out loud. I will not let a novice break and call it surrender. The abbot held their eyes for a long moment and then turned his hands outward. If you stay, do not make a spectacle. The vigil will stand. Obedience is not optional. The exchange set a decision in place. Matthias moved to prepare. He and Peter took up small tasks that were not ostentatious. They moved some candle bases so the ring's tilt was less pronounced, smoothed a few rushes in the dormitory doorway, and carried a folded linen for Ansel's head. Their changes were small, surgical, aimed to blunt harm without exposing the abbot's rule beyond the cloister walls. This was Matthias's chosen path, protection rather than exile. Matthias felt another emotion shift then, from anger to resolve. He tested his own hands against the cord of his braided belt and found the grip steady. The resolve taught him to speak in short sentences. Peter, he said, place this near the infirmary. If he stumbles, mark it. Keep the brass ark. Hide the list in the chronicle when you can. Peter nodded. His breath was shallow but certain. I will. He said, we will not forget. Night settled its ordinary business, beds, locks, the sound of water in a distant cistern, while the brothers moved into their appointed places. The refectory emptied. The candle ring remained at the center like a map of measures that no longer matched the day. Matthias walked back to the dormitory and found the novices arranged on their rushes in uneven groups. The abbot's instructions had reached them in a hush. Attend without bells, attend without assurance. Ansel was pale and kept his hands clenched on his knees. Matthias sat close enough that Ansel could feel the heat from his cloak. Ansel, Matthias, look at me. Count your breaths with me. Breathe in. Now breathe out. He kept his voice low. The breathing exercise was a small concrete tactic, not a sermon. Ansel followed the counting with raw effort. The hourless vigil unspooled differently than anyone had promised. The planned sequence, tilted candles, offset torches, broken watch faces placed face down on the stone, meant that men woke and dozed in mismatched patterns. One man would stand certain he had missed a watch. Another would call out a time that made no sense to his neighbor. The abbot moved through the dormitory with a slow authority, correcting positions and pronouncing the necessity of spiritual loosening. Matthias's role was practical. He held Ansel when the novice slipped between wakefulness and an empty stare. He realigned a blanket when another brother's teeth chattered from cold. He whispered names at intervals to anchor those who began to speak nonsense. Each action was both small and decisive. The climactic rupture came after an hour when ropes were taut and men began to argue aloud about time. A rapid chain of events accelerated. Brother Jens began shouting a time he insisted was midday, a lamp guttering close to his face. Another brother shoved a bench in anger. Ansel tried to stand and collapsed between wakefulness and sleep. The dormitory became a tangle of bodies and shouted minutes. The highlight of the chapter is the moment when Abbot Lucas insists on the necessity of breaking the self, while Matthias physically intervenes to hold Ansel. Matthias saw Ansel fall. He moved before thought finished. He seized Ansel beneath the shoulders and eased him down onto the rushes. The novice's limbs were loose like wet cloth.
Matthias!
Ansel gasped. I am not. Lie still, Ansel, Matthias. He took off his own tunic and folded it beneath the novice's head. Peter, help me carry him to the infirmary corner. Peter came without question. The two of them moved through a chorus of disoriented murmurs. In the doorway, Abbot Lucas blocked their path with a hand raised. You will not make spectacle. Lucas, you will leave him. Let the vigil test him. Matthias met Lucas's hand with no haste. I will not leave him to break, Abbot. I will not call harm holiness. Rapid lines came then, short and staccato. Matthias, Lucas, obedience matters. Abbot Lucas, Matthias, obedience does not name every harm. You defy the order. Lucas snapped. I am holding a novice. Matthias answered. Then hold and do not speak against the vow. Lucas replied. The back and forth lasted but a moment. The argument's cadence was quick. Each man cut the other with a single clause. The confrontation had the required measure of sharpness. It also created an outcome. Lucas made a choice to step back rather than force a physical removal. He collected himself and withdrew along the cloister, his robe barely brushing the stone. The abbot's withdrawal altered the knight's balance without yielding the principle behind his experiment. In the infirmary corner, Matthias and Peter sat with Ansel between them. Ansel's breath came in shallow pulls. His skin had the waxy color of someone who had not slept in a steady rhythm for nights. Matthias touched the novice's wrist and counted a pulse. The measurement was simple, and its concreteness steadied them. Peter produced the cracked brass arc and set it near Ansel's head. He kept his voice low and factual. I found this near the yews tonight. Peter, it is old. I wanted to keep a record. Matthias nodded. He took the brass arc in his hand and felt the metal's edge against his thumb. The arc's curve matched a broken watch face he had once seen in the chapter when he found Peter among the clipped yews. The arc made a piece of the earlier mystery clear. The unmooring had been practiced before and had left physical residue. The aftermath of the hourless night was a slow tightening. Abbot Lucas withdrew to his cell to compose a prayer that sounded more like a justification than a confession. Brothers moved about in a silence that held many things. Some brushed past the infirmary without meeting eyes. Some spoke in short, clipped sentences about duty. Ansel slept in a chair for a long while, and Matthias kept his palm on the novice's shoulder until dawn showed through a narrow slit in the dormitory wall. When the labor of the night stilled, Matthias did the work of record. He took the folded note from the refectory and set it against the ledger he kept for simple daily entries. He did not write a denunciation on the abbey's public register. He could not. He understood what secrecy meant here. Blunt exposure to the outside world would fracture the monastery's survival and scatter novices to orphanage and rumor. But to keep nothing would be to allow harm to continue in pattern. Matthias therefore made a different choice. He wrote a careful account of the night's events, listing names, dates, and the precise sequence of what had happened. He wrote how the candles had been tilted, how Ansel had collapsed, how Brother Peter had kept the brass ark and the tally of broken watches, and how Abbot Lucas had ordered the bellless vigil. He included the folded list he had found under the candle ring and attached the cracked brass ark as description. He dated the chronicle in a steady hand. Peter came twice while Matthias wrote. Once he brought a cup of weak ale and set it down with a wordless look. The second time he stayed and listened while Matthias spoke in low sentences. I will hide this among older records. Matthias, I will not burn it. I will not fling it to the village. If it is found by those who later search, it will stand as plain fact. Matthias, Peter, if they learn and leave us, will the novices survive? Matthias folded the paper and looked at him. If they go, some will survive better. If they stay and this continues, some will not. I will choose the slow truth. Peter's face settled. He put his hand on Matthias's shoulder with a short, certain pressure. The touch was a contract. As dawn arrived, the abbot returned to the refectory with hands that kept a prayer book. He spoke in measured tones to the brothers and named the night's trial a necessary loosening. No public confession of harm came from him. He offered a schedule to re-anchor hours with soft bells the next week, a plan that would read to the outside world as reform. No one argued aloud then except in hushed circles. The chapter's twist unfolded after dawn when a senior brother, Brother Elias, who had not been named before in the cloister's small catalogue of faces, entered with a document in his hand and said plainly that he had once been present for a vigil that had gone wrong. He described a man who lost a sense of day, lost sleep for weeks, then walked away from the monastery to live in the town. Elias' account matched the dates on the folded list. This unexpected voice changed how the brothers saw their night's events. It made the pattern communal, not singular. Matthias listened to Elias and felt clarity arrive the way steady light brings shape to objects. The second twist made the abbot's experiment look less like a spiritual innovation and more like an institutional habit. Elias's testimony forced those who had suspected to confront the weight of evidence. The shift altered loyalties and quieted some defenses. In the final hours before the chapter's close, Matthias performed the concrete act that would define his choice. He took his written chronicle, the folded list, and the description of the brass ark and placed them inside a thin volume of older administrative records. He slid the papers between pages that recorded harvest tallies and the expenses for winter repairs. He pushed the papers in until they sat flush and closed the old book. Peter held the lamp while Matthias worked. The lamp's oil burned low and smelled of resin and cloth. If someone seeks the truth, they will find it in time. Matthias, and if they never search. Peter, then the novices sleep with fewer tests for now. Matthias. His voice was even. I will watch. I will keep Peter's ark and the dates when men failed. I will speak if I see a pattern repeat. Matthias slid the bound ledger back onto the shelf and pushed it between two heavier tomes. He locked the cell chest and placed the key inside his pocket. The movement was simple, private, and irreversible in practice, though not in principle. A record remained. The pattern of the monastery remained for the public eye. Between the two lay Matthias's choice. Conceal to protect in the short run, preserve a paper trail for any future reckoning. He sat a long while in his cell after, listening to Ansel's breath across the courtyard and to the slow scraping of a broom outside the refectory. He felt tired with the wear of decisions. He held Brother Peter's hand once more in the doorway, and then walked to the dormitory to see the novices up and moving with a tentative routine. Ansel nodded at him with a small motion, an acknowledgement reduced to a practical sign. In the final paragraph of this chapter, Matthias closed the ledger's cover, slid the folded list fully into its pages, and set the book firmly on the middle shelf of the record's chest. He then turned the iron key in the lock and heard the chest's latch drop into place. He left the chest lid down, the key warm against his palm, and walked back toward the dormitory, where the brothers were assembling for the morning prayers.